Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into, well, what feels like a fascinating, almost vintage corner of human thought. Today, we're looking at Warren Hilton's 1914 work, Applied Psychology, Driving Power of Thought. Now, this text was part of a series focused on applying psychology to personal and business efficiency. Our goal today is to really unpack the timeless principles this early 20th century book reveals about how our minds actually work. And crucially, how that understanding can be leveraged for, practical achievement and success. Think of it as a shortcut to getting informed on the mechanics of thinking. Okay, so let's jump right in. Right from the start, Hilton introduces this concept that feels both old and surprisingly current, the impellent energy of thought. What exactly is this driving power he's describing?
Right, as a core idea. Hilton's premise, which was pretty new back then, but apparently well settled in psychology circles, was this: that every idea in consciousness is energizing and carries with it an impulse to some kind of muscular activity. So just thinking something creates a tiny physical impulse. Now, pioneers before him, people like Prince, Garish, Sidis, Janet, Binet, they'd used this idea, this vitalizing influence, mostly for healing. But Hilton wanted to push it farther. He saw this energy as the actual means to all practical achievement and all practical success. The basic logic is, well, pretty straightforward. All human achievement comes from bodily action, right? And bodily action is controlled by the mind. Therefore, the mind is the fundamental instrument for achieving any purpose you might have.
Okay, so the mind is this incredibly powerful instrument. How then does it start to make sense of everything coming at it from the world? Hilton talks about two crucial judicial processes that go beyond just, sensing things.
Exactly. It's not just passive perception. The mind actively interprets. These are the causal judgments and the classifying judgments. Causal judgments are the mind's first effort to explain where a sensation comes from. Think of a tiny baby sensing warmth and whiteness. The causal judgment is that vague feeling that something caused it, maybe its milk bottle. But they're limited. Hilton gives this great example of looking at a schoolhouse. Your eye gets this flat, irregularly shaped figure. Your mind makes a causal link. Okay, that image comes from a schoolhouse. But that initial judgment alone doesn't give you the full idea of the schoolhouse, with its depth and perspective in 3 dimensions. He says, taken by themselves, causal judgments are disconnected and all but meaningless. There's just raw data points, not really a full understanding, like the idea house.
Okay, that makes sense. So if causal judgments leave us with this sort of jumble of simple, disconnected sense perceptions, what's the next step? What's the marvel of the mind that pulls it together into something meaningful?
Yes, the marvel. That's where classifying judgments come in. This is the final process, the one that produces the actual idea. See, an adult mind doesn't just get a sensation in isolation. Every new perception automatically triggers associated memories of past experiences. So an idea isn't just what you're sensing right now. It's actually a complex blend of present and past perceptions, all brought together through association and discrimination, figuring out what fits and what doesn't. Take coffee, for example. You see the brown liquid, that's maybe a causal judgment. Then you smell it, another causal judgment. Then you taste it, another one. But your mind classifies all these different inputs, along with memories of coffee, into one single complete idea of coffee.
So it bundles them, like with the butter example he gives.
It's exactly like the butter example. You get the yellow color, the familiar taste, the soft texture, all separate sense inputs. Classifying judgments group these together, assign them to one object, and boom, you have the idea of butter. And critically, this grouping isn't just random mental chaos. Hilton stresses it's done in strict compliance with certain well-defined laws. These are the laws of association. And he believed they prescribe and determine the workings of your mind just as absolutely as the laws of physics control the operations of material forces. Quite a statement.
It really is. It sounds almost deterministic. I mean, our minds feel like they wander all over the place, right? Flashing from New York to San Francisco in an instant. But Hilton's claiming these mental processes are totally law-abiding. So much so that if someone knew all your past experiences, they could predict your very next thought with mathematical certainty. That's bold. So what are these incredibly powerful laws governing our inner world?
It is a bold claim, isn't it? He lays out 4 prime laws of association. First, and most important according to Hilton, is the law of habit. This says the next idea that pops into your head is usually the one most frequently associated with your current thought. Then there's the law of recency. How recently did you make that association? The law of contiguity, were the original things close together in space when you experience them. And finally, the law of vividness. How intense or strong was the original impression? Give some good examples, like if you see a pile of manuscript, you might immediately think of a specific printer you always use. Why? Law of habit, frequent association.
Makes sense.
Or the word cocoa might instantly bring up a specific brand or even like a figure associated with it. Again, likely habit or maybe vividness from advertising. Hilton points out how this works with skills too. For a typist or pianist, constant use has so welded these associations together, finger movements to keys, that trying to change the fingering feels almost impossible.
Right, like trying to learn a new keyboard layout after years on QWERTY. You're fighting ingrained habits.
Exactly. Your brain is following those old, strong associative pathways.
So what's the takeaway here? Hilton challenges us to test this, doesn't he? Like, think of a camera or a cake of soap. What specific brand pops into your mind first and why? It's all about the brands and tags our minds automatically apply based on these laws.
Precisely. It explains why certain products, whether it's food or luxury goods or even things tied to sentiment, get tagged with a definite associate. A name, a brand, maybe a jingle. It's these laws in action. And these processes go way beyond just forming simple ideas like butter or a camera brand. They actually unify and systematize our entire knowledge of the world. They bring order realized from chaos, as he puts it. Think about language itself. A single word like horse instantly conveys a complex bundle of associated ideas and sensations. Without that classification, you'd need like a page-long enumeration of disconnected sense perceptions.
Right. Yeah.
Even abstract reasoning, he argues, is built on this foundation, an inferential process drawing on past sensory experiences linked by these associative laws. It's how we build our whole mental model of reality.
Okay, so we've got how ideas form, how they link together through these laws. But let's get back to that driving power. What actually gives ideas the oomph to lead to achievement? Hilton really emphasizes something he calls emotional energy, especially in business. He says every idea has a certain emotional quality associated with it, a sort of feeling tone.
Yes, this feeling tone is absolutely crucial for the driving power concept. Hilton states it as the law, very directly. Exalted ideas have associated with them a vitalizing and energizing emotional quality. Depressive memories or ideas have associated with them a depressing and disintegrating emotional quality. So he makes a clear distinction. You have energizing emotions, things like love, courage, brightness, earnestness, enthusiasm, positive stuff. And then you have depressing emotions, doubt, fear, worry, gloom, the negative side. And he argues these aren't just, nice to haves or not so nice feelings. They are fundamentally important. He says, no elements are more essential to a successful business or a successful life than the right kind of emotional elements.
He uses some pretty strong analogies too, right?
Oh, absolutely. He calls emotion, earnestness, fire, enthusiasm, the very life of effort. They are steam to the engine. They're what the lighted fuse is to the charge of dynamite. Strong stuff. This positive emotional energy, he claims, makes you fearless and undaunted. It feeds on its own achievements, and he points to historical figures, Napoleon, Joan of Arc, even Pierpont Morgan, as people swept along by this powerful tide of emotional energy.
That's a really empowering idea, isn't it? That by the intelligent direction of your conscious thinking, you can call into your life or drive out of it these powerful emotional influences for good or evil. It suggests we have a lot more agency over our own success or failure than maybe we realize.
Absolutely. It's about consciously directing your thoughts to cultivate the right kind of emotional energy. The source even quotes a Waldo P. Warren on the value of an idea, saying ideas are like the hub to a wheel, the motive power, the keys which open the storehouses of possibility. Ideas determine the bounds, break the limits, move on the goal. But here's the kicker, the paradox Hilton highlights. It takes just as much brain work to accomplish a failure as it does to win success.
Wow. So the mental effort is the same. It's the direction and the emotional quality that differs.
That's exactly his point. He talked about the creative power of thought. If you consciously take for granted that you have the courage, the energy, the self-confidence, and the enthusiasm needed for something, then those qualities actually become available to you. It's about assuming the positive state. He contrasts two ways of approaching business problems. One, rooted in doubt, which is negative, inhibitory, paralyzing, versus one rooted in courage, which is positive, inspiring, action-oriented. His advice is basically, you have only to start the thing off with the right mental attitude and hold to it. All the rest is automatic.
So choose the positive, energizing approach and stick with it.
Pretty much. And he wraps this whole framework up under the term psychological engineering. He presents it very much as a scientific basis for a highly differentiated type of efficiency engineering. And he's careful to distance it from anything woo-woo. He explicitly says it's not about telepathy, spiritism, clairvoyance, animal magnetism, fortune-telling, astrology, or witchcraft.
Right. He's grounding it in observable mental processes and their practical outcomes, almost like an early form of IO psychology, industrial organizational psychology.
Exactly, using scientific observation to boost real-world efficiency.
Okay, let's shift gears then to probably the most practical and maybe historically eye-opening application he discusses. Using these psychological principles in business, specifically for selecting employees. He brings up reaction time as a key measure and kind of challenges that old phrase, quickest thought.
He does. He points out that thought is not instantaneous, which might seem obvious now, but was maybe less so then. He says, really simple automatic reactions might take tenths of a second. But a really intellectual operation, something requiring actual thought, takes 1 to several seconds. And the key point for hiring is that no two people are alike in these speeds. So the goal becomes finding people whose minds work swiftly in the particular way required for your business. It's about matching mental speed to job demands.
And he describes some pretty specific tests they were devising back then, didn't he? Some sound almost, well, quirky today. What were some of these methods?
Oh yeah, definitely products of their time, but fascinating. One was the test of uncontrolled associations. They'd ask someone to just speak 100 different words, one after another, as fast as they could. They timed it, average was about 308 seconds. They even noted patterns, like Professor Jastrow finding women tended to list more articles of dress, suggesting what was maybe top of mind for them.
Interesting. And word association.
Yep, measuring speed of thought with word association. The examiner says a word, the subject says the very first word that comes to mind. Quickest responses were apparently around 1 to 1.2 seconds. Most took maybe 0.6 to 2.6 seconds. But if the trigger word was puzzling or maybe emotionally loaded, the response time could stretch out to 5 and 10 seconds. You can see how that might be revealing.
Definitely. And there are tests for all sorts of things.
A whole range. The text mentions assessing responsiveness, how people make associations, imagination, emotional tendencies, attention span, discrimination skills, persistence, how easily they get fatigued, specific skills like visual, auditory, manual dexterity, even moral character somehow. The idea was these tests could map out individual differences based on age, sex, training, physical condition, and potentially even disclose motives or information that are being intentionally concealed, though how reliably, one might wonder.
So given these were pretty novel tests for 1914, what impacts did they actually have? Did Hilton report any real-world results, like efficiency gains or cost savings?
He certainly did, and some are quite dramatic. He mentions existing tests in the Army and Navy for basics like vision, hearing, colorblindness. Apparently about 4% of trained men were rejected for colorblindness then. So that idea of screening unfit applicants wasn't totally new, but then he gives this incredible example, one of the earliest instances of using reaction time tests in a factory setting. They were selecting girls to inspect steel ball bearings for tiny flaws, a job needing, concentrated type of attention, good visual acuity, and quick and keen perception. They used psychological tests to pick the best candidates. And the outcome? Astonishing. 35 girls did the work formerly done by 120.
Wow, that's huge.
Huge. And not only that, the accuracy of the work went up by 66%. The girls' wages were doubled. Their working day was shortened. And the factory's profit went up substantially. It's a classic early win for applied psychology and industry.
That's incredible. And there was the telephone operator study, too.
Yes. Professor Hugo Münsterberg at Harvard tackled a big problem for telephone companies back then. About a third of the operators they trained turned out to be unfitted and would leave within 6 months. That's a huge training cost down the drain. So Münsterberg didn't just simulate the switchboard. He broke the job down into its elementary mental dispositions. He designed a whole battery of tests: memory for numbers, attention span, like crossing out all the A's in a newspaper article, general intelligence using word pairs, spatial perception, even speed and accuracy of movement with a pencil.
Covering all the bases for that specific job?
Trying to, yes. And the results, he reported them as, on the whole, satisfactory. The operators who did well in the real job also tended to score high on his tests, and those who scored poorly on the tests generally didn't work out. So tests seemed pretty good at predicting who would succeed, allowing the company to screen out unsuitable candidates before investing heavily in training them.
It's really clear how revolutionary these tests were for just identifying the unfit early on, saving potentially massive training costs. But you mentioned it wasn't just about rejecting people, right? There was this idea of round pegs in square holes.
Exactly that. The round pegs in square holes concept was crucial. Maybe someone wasn't suited for one job, like being a motorman, where Hilton notes even a 2/5 of a second difference in time reactions may mark the line between safety and disaster.
Yeah, you definitely want quick reactions there.
Right. And accident claims could apparently eat up 13% of the annual gross earnings for some transport companies. So screening was vital. But that person rejected as a motorman might be perfectly suited for a different job, maybe one where their specific skills would lead to greater success, where their earning power would be greater. It's about finding the right fit, not just filtering out.
And they develop tests for other specific roles, too.
Yes, Hilton mentioned several. For instance, a test for suggestibility for hiring a private secretary. They used things like the line test, where examiners would give misleading suggestions about line lengths to see how easily the person was swayed, gauging their automatic, mechanical, and immediate responsiveness. The idea was you wanted the secretary who would not be easily lured into embarrassing revelations, someone who wouldn't just echo suggestions.
That makes sense. What about a stenographer?
For stenographers, they tested auditory acuity, speed, and accuracy in hearing and reporting sounds. Also rote memory. They'd read lists of concrete and abstract words and see how well the person recalled them, calculating errors like omissions, getting the order wrong, adding words, or perseverations.
Perseveration.
Yeah, that's repeating words from a previous list. Hilton notes this was considered an indicator of a low order of intelligence. They also tested vocabulary range.
It seems they were really trying to quantify everything, even emotions.
To some extent, yes. The text mentions using highly sensitive instruments in crime detection. These could apparently reveal a quickened heartbeat and other subtle evidences of emotion not otherwise discernible when, say, details of a crime were presented to a suspect. Early lie detector type ideas.
Fascinating. And for factory workers.
For factory operatives, there was a device called a disc tachistoscope. It was used to measure their attention power, specifically their range of visual attention. Interestingly, Hilton describes this range of attention as a comparatively constant quantity with each individual, not strongly related to general intelligence and not much improved by practice. So kind of an innate capacity they were trying to measure.
So the overall belief was that you could break down any job.
Pretty much. Hilton concludes that every calling can be analyzed and the mental elements requisite for success can be scientifically disentangled. And furthermore, that definite and scientific exercises can be formulated whereby the individual may train and develop special senses, faculties, and powers so as the better to fit himself for his chosen field of work. Although he does admit that this whole experimental method in psychology was particularly new back then, and no schools were actually using such systematic training yet. It was cutting-edge stuff for 1914.
What an absolutely incredible deep dive. Going back over a century to see how these foundational psychological principles were already being rigorously thought about and applied. Applied to everyday life, to the world of work. From understanding how we even form an idea, to the huge role of emotion, right through to the beginnings of scientific employee selection. It really shows how much effort went into understanding this driving power of thought.
It really does. And what's so striking is that early foresight, seeing how understanding these basic mental processes could yield tangible, practical benefits. And maybe that leaves an important question for you listening right now. If, as Hilton strongly suggests, your environment is wholly mental, shaped by your thoughts and feelings, and if it's capable of such deliberate molding and adjustment by you as will best promote your interests, how might you, starting today, consciously use this knowledge? Knowledge about causal judgments, classifying judgments, the laws of association, the power of emotional energy. How could you use that to deliberately shape your own mental environment for, well, greater personal and professional achievement?
That is a truly thought-provoking challenge, something to really mull over. Until next time, keep exploring the incredible capabilities of your own mind.